Hi everyone, Mr. Hawkins with Hawkins Tech. And with the introduction of iOS 26, it brought some new features to both Apple Music and Apple Podcast. And in this video, I'm going to talk about what those features are. Now, I will show you I am not running the iOS 26 beta. I am on iOS 18.6.2, but I am still going to go over some new features in both Apple Music and podcasts. Now, I have pictures and screenshots to show, as on my iOS 18 device, the features I talk about won't show up. But if we take a look at Apple Music, we have liquid glass. All of the menus you can kind of see through, and there's like an outline around the home button. You don't get that on iOS 18. The reason why that outline is there around the home button is you can now, with your finger, drag at the bottom of the bar the slider around, drag it from home to maybe another option. You could drag it to, this might be on radio. You can drag it to your library and even search. So you can drag across now in iOS 26 with the menu bar. But obviously that won't work in iOS 18. Also in iOS 26, my favorite feature, if I were to, so now as you see here, I have it paused because I don't want to get a copyright strike. But if I go into Apple Music, and by the way, I only listen to my radio on here, so I can't really play any music itself, but the radio does play the music. And obviously I'm not going to get copyrighted. But if I were to click on this, it does take up the entire display, or not the entire display, but you can see the album art here. Well, now in iOS 26, the album art takes up the whole display. And I like what they did with the date and time. They moved the time directly next to the date. That is a really nice change in iOS 26. Now also, within Apple Music, you now can make folders. I believe this is a new feature, although even if I were on iOS 26, due to the fact that I don't listen to music in Apple Music, I would hope that it allows me to put different radio stations inside of folders. Like some of my favorite radio stations, like the one you see here. I would love to be able to put that into a folder, but I don't know if it will allow that. But I do think it's pretty nice that you could put sort of songs that you listen to in folders in the music app. And you can make that folder a playlist as well, which is the whole point of it. So that's a nice change in iOS 26. Now, moving on to Apple Podcast. Apple Podcasts get some really nice updates. Personally, my favorite change is the redesign. Here we are on iOS 18. The podcast app looks the same. But one thing I like that they did is they made changes. The podcast has like a bit of a light around it. It looks different. Now, if I go into a podcast here, if I go into one here, If I go into this podcast here, it doesn't quite take over the entire display, but in iOS 26, again, they would have moved the date next to the time, kind of like what they did with Apple Music. They moved the time on the left side of the date. And that's a really great change. And also within podcasts, we have liquid glass just like in Apple Music. And also, you can adjust the playback speed by scrolling your finger up and down on the playback speed. You can now do that in Apple Podcasts in iOS 26. Hopefully, I can add my podcast there. If you're not already aware, I do podcasts as well on Spotify. As of right now, I don't have an official way to put the Hawkins Tech podcast on Spotify, but I will have a podcast coming out today. This is the latest podcast that I've done. And welcome to the Hawkins Tech. Let me just adjust my speakers here. It may echo a little bit. On this episode, we are going to talk about the iPhone 17. So that's my podcast on Spotify. Now, you do have some additional features, like you can have your songs fade out and another one begins. I hope they add that to YouTube Music, as that's typically where I go to listen to all my songs. Because unfortunately, I don't have an Apple Music subscription, so all I can do is listen to my radio in Apple Music. But those are some of the great features in Apple Music. My favorite thing that they done, and I believe this is for all apps that allow you to see your album art when you play it, it adds the date on the left side of the time. I like that they did that in iOS 26. And when I update, I will go into Spotify and play one of my podcasts so that I can show this to you. Hopefully you enjoyed this video of the new features in Apple Music and podcasts. And also, stay tuned because I will have a podcast coming out later today. I am going to talk about the iPhone 17. Well, really, I'm going to talk about iOS 26 Beta 7, when to expect Beta 8, and also invites to the iPhone 17 event. Now, just really quickly, this coming Monday, which is August the 25th, I would expect invites to the iPhone 17 event. And I also would expect iOS 26 Beta 8. And of course, I will have videos of both of those when they get released. Hopefully you enjoyed this video. My name is Mr. Hawkins with Hawkins Tech, and I will see you guys in the next video. Peace.